Hi, I'm Beth from So Country, and today's tutorial is for the Babylon bag from Hills Handmade. You're going to see lots of amazing tester photos for this bag. Just so you know, even though those photos look complicated and you might think, I can't sew up that bag or that one's going to be too difficult on a domestic machine, I'm going to tell you that you definitely can. This bag is not really even that hard or time consuming of a bag. It sews up quick, but the thing is, with this pattern is precision. There is several parts on this bag that you need to take your time and be careful and kind of know what's going on in advance so you don't make mistakes. Mistakes that I made in this bag. Almost all patterns tell you to read the pattern first before starting. Let's be honest, a lot of us don't do that. We just jump in even though we know we're supposed to and we know we should, we know it'll help us. We just don't. I definitely didn't do that whenever I started sewing this one, and it was my faults, my mistakes that I made. The pattern's written well, there's no problems with the pattern, everything fits perfectly. I just made some mistakes. So let's talk about the gorgeous features of this bag and the mistakes that I made so that we can make sure that you don't make those same mistakes on yours. First thing we have is the piping on the side. I am really into piping right now. This is something that I'm really wanting to kind of work on my skill set with this year. So I was really excited that she did decide to make a bag with piping. It worked perfect for me because I'm really trying to practice with this. So we're going to talk about the best ways to cut, to use, to sew, to add all the piping tips and tricks to get a really good piping on this. My piping worked out okay. I had no problems with it, but if you can see how I'm having a little bit of slouch in my bag, I chose to use cotton woven in this bag and fleece. It did great, but you can see there's some it's not the best structure. I really should have either used vinyl and fleece or cotton woven and foam. On my bag I'm making today, I had already interfaced it with fleece, another thing I shouldn't have done. So mine will still have that same kind of slouchy structure. If you're okay with it, use the fleece. If you don't and you want yours a little more structured, use foam. But just keep it out of your seam allowance if you're sewing on a domestic machine. The other thing that I did that I messed up on completely was the handles. This bag actually has rolled handles, which I am going to do today, and I really wanted to do on this one, but I made the mistake. In the pattern, she tells you right up front, either cut 2-inch or 4-inch wide handles. Well, because I didn't read the pattern all the way to the end, I just like, oh yeah, I love to cut my handles at 4 inches and make a 1-inch strap. I did not think ahead. I did not read ahead to know that I needed to fold this one more time to make the rolled handles. There was no way my domestic machine could go through that many once I did that final fold on the handles. If you are using vinyl and if you are sewing on a domestic machine, it's probably best if you do the 2-inch wide handles. You can test it out to see what your machine can handle though. Know your machine, know the vinyl, because vinyls have different weights and thickness, and then decide on that. So if I would have done that step ahead of time, if I would have thought and took the time to think about, cotton woven and fleece, none of these issues would have came about. The pattern tried to walk me through those steps, but I just rushed into it. The last mistake I made was my connectors. I accidentally, and you can tell if you look, my connectors are not perfectly even. I have less space on this side, more space on this side. Just a measuring issue. Pattern tells me how to measure. Beth just didn't pay good enough attention and double check her measurements. I will show you whenever we're going through this step what I did wrong, how I made that simple mistake, because I do feel like we can make easy mistakes sometimes, even though they're common sense mistakes. And I will make sure to go through that step so that you don't make the same mistake I did. So the 3 things that we want to pay attention to before starting this bag is pay attention to the materials you're using, both in the type of material and the interfacing, and how thick it's going to be going under your machine. Take time to measure and fully understand what you're measuring and where it's going to go. And be okay with slowing down to work on the beautiful details that this bag has. So today's tutorial is going to walk you all through those things, but I'm probably going to give a few more tips of best practices when making a bag like this, because this bag is so gorgeous. And let's just look at this bag's details. We have the piping, a slip pocket, we have these gorgeous connectors. You will have rolled handles on yours, unless you just don't like rolled handles. We have just this beautiful zipper at the top. When we open it up though, guys, it is so deep. You can fit so much stuff inside here. This is a great bag. So now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the pattern pieces and go through everything to make sure that you fall in love with this pattern just like I did. We do not have a lot of pattern pieces to cut out for this bag, so it's a relatively quick cut. We have a slip pocket for the inside the bag. This, of course, is optional. I went ahead and cut mine and folded it right sides together and just clipped it that way. We have one exterior base. It is going to be left raw edge on some of the sides, so it's best to use a vinyl if you have that. If you don't have a vinyl, or if you don't like raw edge, you could cut this maybe a 1/2 inch wider and then fold down your sides by 1/4 inch. On the back of this base, you're going to go ahead and have a piece of, I'm using Royal Pixie Heavy, but you could use a Decaville Light. You're going to keep it out of your seam allowance, and you're going to have the measurements for this piece and go ahead and interface that on there. You will not need a separate piece like this for the interior. This is going to go on top of your exterior fabric, so it's more of just a help with stability, and it's also a decorative feature. So you can see the raw edges right here. I left mine raw, but you could easily fold those under. For those side panels with the piping, you're going to need 2 exterior side panel pieces. You're going to need 2 interior side panel pieces. So you're going to go ahead and interface everything with an SF101. For the slip pocket piece, you will need 2 exterior, 2 interior. Again, go ahead and interface all of these with your SF101 or equivalent. Your handles. I'm using a vinyl for mine. I am cutting mine at the 2-inch mark. You can see mine is thin and it's also a little stretchy. So I went ahead and drew a line down the middle of this for me to fold, but whenever I'm sewing this, I'm going to be mindful of that stretch. What does that mean? That means I'm going to go slow. If I see it dragging, I'll switch to a Teflon foot. I usually don't have too much trouble with just my skinny zipper foot on here, but if I have trouble, I will switch. So be mindful of the materials you're using when you're cutting out your handles so you can make sure if you want to get those rolled handles. You're going to have 2 of these. I'm not interfacing them, but I did go ahead and draw the line down the middle of both. Now I need that main panel piece. This panel piece starts here, it wraps all the way around, goes back here. We just attach the bottom on top of it. So for both of mine, I'm using directional. The way I handle that is that I cut it in the middle right here, and I added the seam allowance, and then I sewed that back together so that I'll have the print going up on this side, and then when it wraps around, I'll have the print going up on this side. If you are using non-directional print, you do not have to worry about this step, and you just cut yours out exactly with the measurements the pattern gives. The pattern does walk you through the steps if you choose to use a directional print. If you have any questions about that, just let me know. For the exterior, I did interface this with the SF101 equivalent, and I added a layer of Thermolan, and I went ahead and fused those together. For the interior, I just have this one long piece, and I did interface it with the SF101 equivalent. Okay. I'm going to have 4 zipper tabs, 2 exterior, 2 interior. I'm going to have 4 connectors. If you feel your vinyl is not thick enough, you could double this or you could add a piece of Decaville Light, piece of ribbon. There's plenty of options. Know your machine, know the vinyl, and do what you feel is comfortable with. But what you'll do is you'll end up putting your hook on there and folding it down. So after you fold that and feel it, see if you feel comfortable with the support it's going to give to your handle. You will need piping. If you choose to use it, you're going to need several pieces. The shorter pieces she gives the measurements for are going to be attached to the slip pocket. The two longer pieces are going to go around the entirety of that side panel. Those are the two different size cuts you will need for the piping if you use it. This bag is bound. You will need binding, but you only bind around the sides. You do not have to bind anywhere else. So it's not like you need a lot of binding, and it is not a very hard bind on this bag. I will need one piece of zipper tape, number 5, one number 5 pull, and then I will need the connectors for my strap here. I'm just going to choose to use the 1-inch rectangle rings for mine. I have 4 of those. I just realized I'm going to change these to black. When you see these again, they're going to match. Or I'll change my zipper pull. One way or the other. I need these to match, so I will take the time to do that. Rivets. I'm going to be using rivets in mine. It is optional. If you want to have 2 on each one, like mine, you would have 2, 4, 6, 8. If you just wanted to use 1 on each one in the middle, you would only need 4. That is an optional thing. You could also do optional purse feet on the bottom. I'm not doing purse feet on mine, basically, because I'm out of purse feet. So those are the pieces you will need to complete this bag. So get everything cut and interfaced, and we will go ahead and get started sewing. The first thing we're going to do is the prep work. With this pattern, I'm pretty much going to go in the exact order she does things, because her order is exactly the way I would have sewn it anyway, so it works out great. Grab out that exterior base piece that is interfaced. Grab out this exterior panel piece, and what you do is you just center this exactly on your main exterior. It's easy for me because I have that seam right in the middle there, so I don't have any trouble really being able to tell my midpoint. I'm just going to add a clip on each side, and then what I'll do is I will sew around the perimeter of this base piece, and I'm just going to do 1/8 of an inch away all the way around and get that attached on. The next thing I will do is I will take that interior slip pocket, and I'm going to sew it just like I would any other slip pocket. Start at the bottom, lock in the stitches, come up, pivot, lock in stitches, break the thread, then come over here, back stitch again, pivot, back stitch again, and then we will turn it right sides out. And you can press it flat if you need to, but make sure you press your raw ends down, and then top stitch across the top of this. So let's get this prep work taken care of before we get on to anything else more tricky. So now I've attached the base to the exterior, and I've finished my slip pocket. I'm going to set these 2 pieces aside. Now we are going to start working on the side panels. So take out one of your exterior and your interior slip pockets and the shorter piece of your piping. Let's talk a little bit about piping before we get started. I am using pre-made piping. I don't want to be using pre-made piping. It's not good quality, but I bought it way back early in my sewing days, and it's on a big spool, so I refuse to waste it. So I'm determined to use it all up, but once I get through with this piping, I will be making my own. If you have pre-made piping, it's probably not cut on the bias. Most of the time it's not. However, this one, it's okay if I don't use the bias cut piping. Even though I'm going around a curve at some parts, I will show you some tips to make it easier. when you have your pre-made piping, one side will have like thicker stitches than the other. That's the side that I want to go on the interior. So what I'm going to do is my prettier side of my piping, I'm going to lay it right sides down on my exterior slip pocket. The main problems people have when sewing on piping is it either disappears in the seam allowance, or what it does is it will be too much of it showing and you'll show some of your ugly threads. I'm going to match up the raw edge of the piping with the top edge of that slip pocket, and then I'm going to take this lining piece and I'm just going to sandwich it down, lay it right sides down, sandwiching the piping in between. When I sew this, I want to make sure that I'm sewing. You can either do it two ways. You can measure down and see how much of a seam allowance you need to just start getting the piping to be showing. So like this, you can measure it this way, and I can see that mine is about 3/8 of an inch. So if I sew with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, I'm probably going to be pretty perfect. But what I do instead is when I lay this all down, I use my skinny foot, the zipper foot. There is a piping foot, but I don't have it. And then I'm just going to get it right up against this, almost on top of it. Part of my foot will almost be on top of that piece of piping. And so that my needle will be going right where that piping ends. So it'll be just going right up against it, making it a very tight fit on it. I don't go fast on this step. I go slow, and I use my finger, I use my stilo, I use everything to make sure I'm getting right up against there. It's not hard when you get used to it, but when you first do it a couple times, you'll feel like you're going so slow, and you may even have to sew over it. If you look at it, you may even be like, okay, I need to get it a little bit closer because I'm still seeing too much of the thread, or not, the piping doesn't look right. So check it and then see, but just know if this is your first time using piping, you may have to go slower, but you do get quicker and better at it as you go along. So let's just line up all this top edge, make that sandwich there. This is the part we will be sewing. So you can use the seam allowance given in the pattern on this, but basically you're going to be trying to get as close as you can to that piping. So I'm just going to have part of my foot actually on the piping so that my needle goes right up against it. After I sew that piping on, I'm going to flip it over and pull the lining and exterior wrong sides together, matching up the bottom just like you would any other slip pocket. The piping is optional, but it is a really cool little additional design, and it's fun to learn for you to start adding it to other bags. So if you have extra time, I suggest you try it. I'm going to take the time to push the piping up with my finger, roll my seams down, get everything laying nicely. You can iron it if you want. I don't feel like I need to. So I'm going to top stitch now right below the piping, but while I'm top stitching, I'm making sure I'm pulling that piping and making like it's separating and not rolling up and going up in it. So I'm going to be pulling my piping up and my exterior down, so I just have that really cool top edge there showing. So let's top stitch 1/8 of an inch away on our exterior, but making sure we're keeping the exterior from rolling up on top of our piping so we still are able to see the piping clearly. Now I'm just going to trim off the extra piping on the sides. And I was fine with my piping being white, but you could cover the piping, or you could even unpick. If you have pre-made binding, you can unpick those threads, take out your piping, and just make your own. I'm just not going to worry about that for time's sake and just to not waste any materials. So this is what it looks like now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of my lining side panels, I'm going to lay it right sides down. I'm going to take one of my exterior side panels and lay it right sides up so the wrong sides are together. So I had that little sandwich there. Then I'm just going to lay my slip pocket piece directly on top, matching it up there at the bottom and on the sides. I'm going to put a couple clips in place here. And I'm just going to baste this all together. So this is what we have at this point. What we're going to do now is attach that other piece of piping all the way around this. Grab your bigger piece of piping, and again, if yours has a prettier side than the other one, lay it right sides down with the raw edge against the raw edge of this side panel piece. And what I like to do is I like to give myself about an inch, inch and a half of overhang, and that's where I make my first clip. So I'll leave this tail here, and then I'm going to start clipping all the way around this pocket. This is what I have. Since my piping is not cut on the bias, you can see I have some really ugly corners here. The way I'm going to remedy this is I'm going to use my snips and make 3 snips. I'm going to make a snip on right where the curve starts, right where the curve ends, and one right in the middle. I'm just clipping into the piping, not any past these stitches right here, but just into the unstitched part of the piping. I am not clipping through my pocket at all. I also have some overhang here. What I'm going to do with this overhang is I am going to have this part going flat like this, and then I am going to open this seam up on this part. So what I mean is I'll probably do it a little bit down here actually. And I'm going to start picking out these threads. You can see with mine where it is a pre-made binding, this just comes out super easy. They're just some basting stitches and they're very loose. So I'm just going to pull out those threads. After I get those threads pulled out, I'm going to open up the piping, and that is going to expose the piping cord. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out that piping cord. Let me get my real scissors. It will not cut with those snips. And I cut out that piece of piping cord. I don't have solid measurements. It doesn't matter so much as long as you have a good overlap. What I'll do now for this part that I've cut the piping cord out of, I'll fold it under. And then I'm going to wrap it around this piece of my existing piping so that it fits neatly and it's just a perfect seam. So my existing piping will just nestle perfectly in there. Wrap this around, and then when I sew this and attach it all together, you won't be able to tell any difference really unless you look extremely close at it, and nobody's going to be doing that, or at least you wouldn't think they would. So now we have that completely clipped, and you can see it looks pretty seamless. There's just going to be a little spot there and you won't even be able to notice that so much. For these sides, like I had said, I'm just going to make the 3 snips. So one before the curve, and I just go close but not into that basting line. One actually in the curve, and then one just a little bit. And when I say like a little bit before or after the curve, I mean maybe 1/4 of an inch. That is just going to help this spread. So look at this corner, how it looks a little smoother compared to this corner that looks a little bit bunchy. This one's not bad, but it'll help it when I'm sewing to just lay flatter. So I'm going to repeat that for this one. I am now going to sew the piping on with the 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I have found that whenever I do the full seam allowance with the steps, sometimes the edge of the piping will roll up and get in the way. So I baste with the 1/8 of an inch all the way around. Then I use the full seam allowance when I attach this to the bag. After that, we'll put these aside and we'll be done with this step. Now I've sewn on my piping and my pocket's complete. I'm going to repeat that for the second one and we will set these aside. Now it's time to work on the connectors for our straps. So you should have 4 pieces cut like this. Like I said, you could either double this, or you can add a layer of Decaville Light, or you can add ribbon, whatever you want to give it the security that you want it to have. On the back here at the top, I'm going to put 1 layer of double-sided tape. Then I'm going to slip my D-ring on, and I'm going to slip it right down to where, honestly, as far as it'll go down. I peel off my double-sided tape, and then I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to fold that down, but I'm going to make sure before I push it all the way down that everything looks even, and I like the way it looks. After I have that secured down in the back, then what I'll do is I'll repeat that for all 4 of the connectors that I'm making. So I have all of these ready. Then I just add another piece of double-sided tape on the back. Now that I have each of these pieces on here, it's time to grab out that exterior and work on attaching them. Like I told you before, I had trouble with this. What I did was you make measurements given in the pattern. The pattern tells you how far down to mark and how far in to mark. I did that part perfectly. But what I did was I added 1, she says to add the inside piece to that mark. But I added 1 inside and then 1 outside. You can't do that. You need to add all of them the inside. So at that intersection is where I'm going to add both of these on the inside. So your mark is right here. The connector goes inside there, and the top part goes right up against the intersection. Once we have in place where we want, we are going to remove it. I'm just going to work one at a time because my double-sided tape won't be perfectly great at holding this in place. So I'll peel off 1 piece of double-sided tape, and then I'm going to put that right there on the inside of that mark. I want to make sure that I do not have double-sided tape anywhere where I'm going to be sewing. Especially for my machine, if you sew over double-sided tape repeatedly, you will have skipped stitches, you won't have neat, pretty stitches. It will be a mess. I've had it happen plenty of times before. So I only put a little bit right here in the middle because I'm not stitching in the middle. The pattern tells us to sew around the connector twice. I have a little bit of trouble with getting perfect stitches, so I'm only going to sew around this once, but then I'm going to put 2 rivets in the middle of the connector to give it extra holding power to make sure that it's secure. Definitely would be safer if you did the double row of stitches. Hopefully you feel better with your stitches than I do, but I struggle with it. The way I'm going to start this is right here in the middle of this straight part. The reason why I'm starting there is it'll give me plenty of time to get situated with my stitches before I start on this curve. But then when I come back up on the other curve, I have a few more stitches so I can get straight and finish right exactly where I started. So that's the best method for me. I have on my skinny foot, it's an 1/8 of an inch foot. I'm going to get right up against this hardware. I'm going to start stitching here. Now whenever I go to turn on this curve, it's going to be a little tricky with this hardware, so I have to be really careful that I don't have a missed stitch there. If you feel uncomfortable with that, you could get a little further away, or you could use a hump jumper. I am going to back stitch right here, but you could also pull the threads through, but I will go slow. I will take my time. I will do 1 stitch, then pivot, 1 stitch, then pivot. It won't be perfect, but it'll look good enough. I have my first connector attached. I have to repeat this for the other one on this side and then the other 2 on the other side, so 4 in total. I'm going to do all of that off camera, and then I'm also going to add in 2 rivets on each of these right here in the middle. And I don't have measurements for those. I just kind of eyeball them to make sure I get them close enough. So let's go ahead and do all that, and then we'll come back when it's done and move on to the next step. So I finished the exterior, I have my connectors on, have the middle on, everything's good. I'm going to set it aside and work on the lining. Pull out your lining piece, and then the pattern tells you how far down you measure to make the placement for where you're going to put your slip pocket. So I made my marks there, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have this on here. It's centered, it's down the right measurements. I'm going to sew. I will sew along the 3 sides, leaving that top open. If you want for decoration, you can even add a rivet too on the side there. Your choice, but I'm just going to keep it simple and sew here. I will be sewing an 1/8 of an inch away from this folded edge along those 3 sides. I want to make sure that I back stitch nice at the beginning and the end because the pocket will have a lot of stress where we'll be using it quite a bit in our bag. I have the slip pocket attached. I'm going to set this piece aside, and now I'm going to pull out the zipper and zipper tabs. I cut my number 5 zipper to the measurements given the pattern. I added a pull to it. I did decide to go with silver so I could keep in with that theme of the silver since I had silver vinyl. I'm going to pull out my 4 zipper tabs. This is going to be done just like any traditional zipper. You'll take your exterior zipper tab, place it right sides together with the zipper tape. Take your lining zipper tab and place it right sides together with the exterior zipper tab. It'll be against the wrong side of the zipper tape. So you just make this sandwich, make sure everything lines up. You'll have a little bit of extra room on both sides that we will trim down after we finish sewing. I'm going to put a clip or 2 in place. You could base the tabs on one at a time, or you could use double-sided tape. I'll just use clips. And then I'm going to sew this with the seam allowance given in the pattern. After I sew this on, I will pull the tabs wrong sides together and then just top stitch across the top and repeat those same steps for the other side. So now that I have my zipper ready, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add this to my main panels and get everything attached. We're getting really close to finishing up this bag. I'm going to center it on the lining, right sides up. And then I'm just going to do a basting step. You can skip this step if you want and just go ahead and attach your exterior, but I just like to baste sometimes. It doesn't matter to me which side is my front, so I don't have to pay attention to that any when adding this exterior to this zipper. So if you have a preference, make sure you're aware of that and have it lined up properly. For me though, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I have my connectors going down so that I don't have any risk, even though they're not close, of getting hit by my needle. And then I'm just going to match up the sides and that top, and I'll sew across this edge with the full seam allowance given in the pattern, and that will get everything connected. Now that I have these 3 layers connected, I'm going to flip it apart so they are wrong sides together. I'll make sure I pull up my zipper tape and kind of just roll those seams down. Now I'm going to top stitch on my exterior an 1/8 of an inch away from this folded edge. So now what we're going to do is we are going to clip the exterior right sides together with the zipper tape, and then we're going to pull back this lining and clip it, and it'll be going the wrong side of the zipper tape, but it'll be right sides together with our exterior. So we're doing the same thing. It just might look a little odd for a moment, but we're going to clip all these edges together and then sew them with the full seam allowance given in the pattern. Okay, so this is what we have. Here is our exterior, here is our lining. You can see they're separate completely. We're just attaching them at the top. If you feel like there's any risk of the zipper tape slipping or anything, you can use double-sided tape. But go ahead and sew these together with that seam allowance given in the pattern. Trim off any overhang if you have any from your zipper tabs. And then what you can do is you're going to turn this right sides out. So I'm just going to start pulling. So now we have a complete tube here, and what we're going to do now is we're going to top stitch along the exterior. It's a little tricky to top stitch a tube if you have a flatbed machine, but it can be done. We will feed it through and we're just going to be very slow and we'll be pulling the other parts to keep them out of the way, but it can be done. It's just a slower process than your normal top stitching. So now that I have the tube together, I want to turn it so that the exterior is the inside, but it does have the lining all the way around it. And so you can see it's all one piece now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to feed it through my machine this way with the exterior inside. But I'm going to be very slow. So I'll start first by pulling this back and keeping these two pieces pulled tight. And I'll just slowly feed it through and be manipulating it the whole time. So we're about halfway through. Make sure that you keep a good pressure on these two, the lining and the exterior, pulling them apart from that zipper so that they do not, like the lining doesn't creep up in front of your zipper and kind of block it from opening. So it's a little, you got to pull a little hard on it. If you wanted, if this is too tricky, when you're at the midpoint, you could back stitch, break your stitches, and then start again from the other side. But I'm just going to keep going and pulling it through this way. At this point, I can put my hand in this side and kind of help myself to keep it opening better. Okay, so now that I have that top stitching done, now what I want to do is I want to baste all around both of these sides that are opened, just so that'll help me whenever I'm going to attach the side panels. It'll be less things that have a chance to shift. So I'll just keep it turned this same way. No need to turn it back the other way yet. And I'm just going to go all the way around with 1/8 of an inch. I have the first side basted. I'm going to go ahead and repeat that for this other side. So now that I have everything basted together, I'm going to pull out one of my side panels. I'm going to keep my exterior on the inside and I'm going to mark my centers. It's pretty easy to find your centers on this bag. We have our zipper tab right here. Here's our zipper and here's our tab. The middle of that zipper tab is your top center. The middle of your bottom panel, if you marked it correctly, is your bottom center. Not too hard to find on the bag. On your panel here for the side, just go ahead and fold it in half. And then you can either mark it with a ink pen or with clips like I'm going to do. What we're going to do then is we're going to attach this right sides together with our bag. Make sure you orientate it properly. Of course, you want your slip pocket to be able to be used and not upside down. So this will be your top, this will be your bottom, this will go up against your zipper tab. So you just put the center of this with the center of the bag. Go ahead and do the same thing with the bottom. And then you're just going to clip the rest of the way around. I've clipped around most of this side panel, but I haven't clipped the bottom corners yet. You can see, look right here, how it's kind of sticking up. This is normal. This is what you expect to see. This is still a perfect fitting bag. What you have to do is you have to push this part down to make that proper shape of this barrel. We don't want a perfectly round barrel. We want the bottom slightly flat. So when you push it in, look at how great it fits then. Also, if you didn't push that in and get it flush better, you would lose that edge of your piping. So your piping would disappear. So make sure you push that in on both sides to create that shape that we want with this pattern. Remember, we've got to sew this with making sure we don't go over that piping. You can put your fingers here and you can feel where that bump of that piping is. You need to be continually feeling to make sure you're sewing it properly. Yes, you could just sew with the seam allowance and probably hit it perfectly, but I have found that it is better for me to just kind of go along while I'm sewing and just kind of keep note of where it is and be feeling along it. And even if I can, have half of my foot on that piping so that needle is going right against the edge of it. So I'm going to go ahead, and I usually like to start here at the bottom, and I'm just going to sew all around here. Be mindful of your piping, but get as close as you can to the seam allowance given in the pattern. If you're stressed about it, when you're done, you can flip it out and check it and see how it looks. It'll save you some effort in the long run, because after we do this, then we need to bind this side of the bag. Now that we have the side panel attached to the bag, what we're going to do is we're going to add the binding. I like to do one side at a time just to make it a little bit easier for me. I'm also going to be using pre-made binding. Typically I don't, but whenever there's a bag that has curves like this on the inside and a place where you can't really see it well, we might as well take a little shortcut. The way this bag opened, you are very little, just a little bit where you see the binding. It's not going to be noticeable at all, so I'm going to save the time on this. What I do to start this binding is I just fold down the raw edge, and then I will just wrap this binding all around my seam. Whenever I sew this, I want to make for sure I do not go over those previous stitches I made. So I will sew just slightly in front of those stitches, so about a 1/16 of an inch away towards the seam allowance side. This will still attach the binding nice enough so where there won't be any loose edges or raw edges showing, but it'll also save me any stress from worrying about me losing any of the piping on the exterior of the bag. So I'm going to clip all around here, and then I'm going to sew on the binding. Then I'll repeat this all for the second side of the bag. I have the binding and everything attached. You can see I have the slip pocket on this side. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to open my zipper and turn everything right sides out. Everything is looking adorable. You can see the piping turned out really well. I do need to do some shaping. Whenever I talk about shaping, what I talk about is rolling those seams and even clipping them at times to get them to line up properly. So you can see just that little bit of rolling completely helps. If it wants to keep going back, just put your clip in there, take it over the iron, whatever you need to do. But everything looks wonderful. The last step we need to do now is to attach our straps. So when we're working on the handle, we have the 2-inch strap. Go ahead and draw a line down the middle. I'm going to use double-sided tape along each long edge to fold it to this line. I'm not going to fold it exactly to that line. I'm just going to leave a teeny gap, maybe a 1/16 of an inch is what I'm going to do. See how there's that little teeny gap right there? I'm going to do that all the way down this strap. Now what we're going to do is we're going to top stitch down each long edge. This is what I have at this point. Now I'm going to use the pattern, and she gives us a measurement as to how far down to mark a spot on each end of our strap. Here are the marks that we need to make. We are going to fold the strap in between those two lines. And so what we'll do now is we will start folding and make it look like a rolled handle. So now this is what we have. We are going to top stitch directly on this line all the way from this side where we have the mark all the way down to the other side, just on over top of our top stitching. Now if it makes you nervous to top stitch over previous stitches, what you could do is make this mark in the beginning and just top stitch down those two sides to that mark, and then you would just have one row of top stitching here. That is something you could definitely do too. I don't care to go slow and just be very careful to make sure my needle goes in these holes, but just keep that in mind. You do have an option to skip this little extra step here. Okay, now that I have that finished, I look to make sure it's about even there, and it is. And what you do at this point is you take your bag and you feed that through, and then you're just going to either, and you can see I just have it folded under there, and you're either going to sew or rivet or both, whichever your preference is, to finish up this strap. I'm going to put a clip in here just so you can see and kind of have a really good idea of what it's going to look like. So this is what it's going to be. Of course, I have some loose threads. I'm going to make sure this is even. I can see right now that it's not even, so I'm going to check that. But this is what it's going to look like. So I'm going to go off camera. I'm going to rivet this, and then I'm going to do my other strap, and then we'll come back and look at the finished bag. So I have completed my Babylon bag from Hills Handmade. This bag turned out even better than the last one because I followed the pattern a little bit better. I made sure I had my connectors the right way. I took my time with my rolled handles and got them on. I didn't put rivets on here. I may do that later, but right now I kind of like it without. So I feel really good about this, really like it. The pattern will be linked in my description as always. The vinyl and fabric are from J&R Edwards on this bag, and I will have that website linked in my description as well. If you have any questions or concerns, or if you have a pattern you'd like me to sew up next, just let me know. I'm always open to suggestions, and I hope you guys have a great day sewing and enjoy the rest of your day.